Hello and welcome to the first of my revision videos on Depression War and Recovery 1930 to 1951. This is Unit 1 within the exam series. It's the first exam that you will sit. There are 7 key questions as with every unit that we do, and today we're going to be making a start with the coming of the Depression. As always, I'm going to ask you to pause the video at this point so that you can take down the topics that we're going to be discussing today, either in spider diagram form or in note form, totally up to you, whatever works best. And also remind you, as I always do as well, that it's not just this video that you should be using, it's the booklet that we've uploaded onto Teams, it's your class books, it's BBC Bite Size, any other kind of information you can get your hands on as well. So, Britain is the first industrial nation. It's where the first train was produced and developed. It's where the Industrial Revolution had the biggest impact. It happens the earliest. Its textile, coal, iron and steel industries benefit a lot from lack of competition because Britain is so early to the party with this. There isn't much competition around in the 18th, sort of late 18th centuries and the early 19th century as well. But as the 19th century progresses, other countries start to copy Britain's industrial development, and they also start to develop technology at a much quicker rate than Britain does as well. By the 1920s, Britain has major economic rivals in the USA and Japan, and even Germany starting to catch up with the rest of the world as well, despite the First World War. And this means that Britain is experiencing huge economic hardships, and it's having economic problems way before the Wall Street crash occurs anyway. So these are the old industries, the sort of old heavy industries that contributed to the Depression, or their decline, so you should say, contributed to the Depression. Coal could now be produced much more cheaply abroad. In the mid-20s, it could be produced in the USA for 65p a tonne, compared with £1.56 a tonne in Britain. British coal was more expensive because it was more difficult to mine, and the mines also hadn't really invested in upstate machinery, and the industry is run by coal mine owners who in most cases don't want to modernise, they don't want to invest their money in modern technologies. This is particularly true in South Wales. Once this was the home of raw materials of Britain's Industrial Revolution, it was where most of Britain's coal was mined, and its coal was sent all over the world, but by the 1920s and early 30s it was in a really poor way. It lost its European markets because Germany was making some of its reparation payments to countries in coal. The French favoured buying coal from America rather than Britain, and this meant that the demand for coal from Welsh coalfields dropped significantly. Also, investment in the coal industry was stagnant, meaning that modern mining methods had not been introduced like in competitor countries. This results in unemployment in places like Swansea and Merthyr at reaching 25%, and in Dowlais, which is up in Merthyr Tydfil, a little village up above Merthyr Tydfil, there was actually 80% unemployment. The iron and steel industry suffered for a lot of reasons as well. There's far less demand for ships and armaments after the First World War. Competitors like USA and Japan again regularly undercutting British prices, and the steel making plants are mostly larger, much more efficient and much more modern. The steel industry in South Wales was particularly ill-equipped to cope with this. It had real stern competition from the USA and Germany, whose steelmaking plants were more technologically advanced and much more efficient as well. In 1929, Nebber Vale steelmaking ceased completely. A major part of the steelworks in Dowlais also closed in 1930, and that left 3,000 steelworkers unemployed as well. The textiles industry declined as man-made fibres such as polyester become more popular because they're more hard-wearing, and combining these materials with cotton as well and wool, it actually makes for a more hard-wearing and easier to wash garment, so it became much more popular. British textile industries also had competition from Japan and the USA during the 20s. The safe home markets become vulnerable to foreign competition like USA and Japan, particularly up in Lancashire where the cotton industry had been so dominant in the past. It actually now couldn't compete with cheaper cotton produced in other countries in the world like USA, Japan and India as well. And then shipbuilding. This took a massive nosedive in the 1920s. The fall in trade after the First World War meant there was less need for ships. International disarmament meant a fall in demand for warships. And again, you've got your other countries that can produce warships much more cheaply and quicker as well. So a lot of the buyers, the countries going to other countries to buy them, whereas they used to come to Britain. Also really important when thinking about the coming of the Depression and why the Depression happened. You've got competition from abroad. Much of the British industry in the 20th century has developed on the coalfields in the north because they depended on steam power. These old industries mostly produced raw materials on heavy goods such as ships, iron and steel, and they depended upon exports, and they were only profitable if they could sell abroad. In the 20s, the British industry faced more and more competition that had bigger factories that could produce more cheaply. I've already alluded to that when we looked at like Japan and USA being massive competitors, India being a huge competitor in the textiles industry. So lots of competition from different countries, meaning that people were just not, and countries and governments were just not buying from Britain anymore. Obsolete methods as well. America was very, very fast to cottoning on to things like mass production. And as we've already discovered when we looked at America as well during the 20s, there was cars being produced very, very rapidly during this time as well. Henry Ford could with the mass production line could produce a car very, very, very quickly and for quite cheaply as well. This was copied by many other industries in the USA, meaning that the USA was one of the world's leading economies during this time, or the world's leading economy during this time. Britain were really slow to update. They did not make the most of the emerging industries such as chemical and car making industries. Their methods of production were really slow. They didn't cotton on to mass production until too late. They didn't cotton on to the production line until too late. And their methods unfortunately became obsolete, meaning again that other countries weren't looking to buy from Britain because one, it was too expensive because Britain couldn't afford to lower their prices because it took so much time and effort to make the products. And two, it was just easier to buy from these other countries that were producing things much more quickly. New markets as well. Finding new markets to sell British goods was really difficult. The British government in the 20s allowed foreign countries to trade with Britain without having to pay import tax. There was no tax on products coming into the country. This made foreign goods seem cheap, while the British had to pay taxes in other countries. So it was actually cheaper to buy foreign goods in Britain sometimes than it was to actually buy homemade British goods because they hadn't put import taxes on them. This hit the shipbuilding industry in particular very, very hard. No one was buying and selling, and there was no need to build ships to transport goods. This had a massive impact on the steel and coal industries as well, because obviously to build ships you need steel, to get them going you needed coal, and it was just a domino effect then, but because of these things. Import duties. British governments had tried to encourage free trade between countries, meaning no taxation on anything coming in and out in the 20s, but many others, especially the USA, used tariffs to protect their homegrown industries. You already know in the 20s there was things like the Ford-Macomber tariff. The USA was putting massive taxes on things coming into their own country to try and encourage Americans to buy American goods. Britain didn't do that, and following the Wall Street crash, import duties around the world rose anyway, and international trade declined sharply. Between 1929 and 1931, exports from Britain actually fall by half. Again, demand for ships to transport goods falls dramatically, and then this has a domino effect on other industries, as we've already discussed. There's a rapid growth then in unemployment. 6% of the population in 1929 are unemployed, 15% by 1932. Over 3 million people no longer had a wage, couldn't buy consumer goods. This leads to a further decrease in demand for British goods because people just couldn't afford to buy them, and this causes more businesses to go bankrupt and creates greater unemployment. And then the Wall Street crash happens. So there's that term that we always think about, that phrase, when America sneezes, Europe catches a cold. This is very, very true of America and Britain. The Depression in the USA had a major impact on the UK economy. American economic policies resulted in numerous countries, including Britain and Germany, sliding into a huge economic slump. Germany in particular suffered probably the worst, but a lot of the countries in Europe suffered because of this. Any event which caused the collapse of the largest, richest and most powerful economy in the world would impact on other countries, which depended on US loans and trade. After the First World War, the USA had loaned money out to Germany. It had loaned money out to France and Britain during the war to pay for armaments as well, and they called all those loans back in. President Hoover tried to put high tariffs on to stop American consumers buying goods from other nations, and these made the non-US goods more expensive, thus led to a decline in the demand and profits. This is all stuff that you've already done when studying the American Unit 2. In Britain, though, business confidence falls really dramatically. So this is the impact the Wall Street crash has specifically on Britain. International trade declines, so there's no more trade in between countries because countries just can't afford to do that anymore. Exports in Britain between 29 and 31, as we've discussed, fall by half. Britain's balance of trade was badly affected. It had a trade deficit of 114 million, so it was in 114 million worth of debt, compared to being in a surplus of 104 million in 1928. So in 3 years, it had gone from being 104 million pound in surplus to 114 million in debt. There was a rapid growth of unemployment, and by 1930 it had reached 2 million and 3 million by 1932. And all of these are reasons that the Depression happened in Britain.